Dr. Sarah had always been told she was too stubborn for her own good. Standing in the middle of the abandoned mining station on 442B, surrounded by the acrid smell of sulfur and the distant rumble of volcanic activity, she was beginning to think her critics might have a point. The emergency beacon had been broadcasting for 3 days when her small research vessel picked up the signal. Most ships would have logged it and moved on. Emergency beacons from the outer rim were usually death traps or pirates looking for easy prey. But Sarah wasn't most people, and the medical officer's oath she'd taken 15 years ago still meant something to her. The station's main corridor stretched before her like the throat of some mechanical beast. Emergency lighting cast everything in an eerie red glow, and her boots echoed against the metal grating with each careful step. The atmospheric readings on her scanner showed the air was breathable barely, but the temperature was dropping fast. Whatever had happened here, the station's life support systems were failing. She'd been working as a trauma surgeon aboard the merchant vessel Prosperity when the beacon caught her attention. Captain had been reluctant to investigate, but Sarah had convinced him with a combination of medical ethics and the promise of salvage rights if the station was truly abandoned. Now, creeping through the empty corridors with nothing but a standard medical kit and her stubborn determination, she was starting to question her judgment. The beacon's source was deeper in the station, past what looked like living quarters and a small mess hall. Sarah's scanner indicated life signs ahead, weak but definitely present. She quickened her pace, her medical training overriding her fear. Someone was alive in this metal tomb, and every second counted. The corridor opened into a massive cargo bay, and Sarah's breath caught in her throat. There, sprawled across nearly half the chamber, was a dragon. Not a metaphor or some alien creature that resembled the mythical beasts from Earth's legends. This was a dragon in every sense that mattered. Scales the color of deep emeralds caught the emergency lighting and threw it back in prismatic patterns. Wings that could have wrapped around a small building lay folded against its massive sides. The creature's head, easily the size of a ground car, rested on the metal deck, and Sarah could see its chest rising and falling in labored breaths. But it was dying. The dragon's scales were cracked and bleeding, revealing the softer tissue beneath. What looked like burn marks covered its left flank, and Sarah could smell the sickly sweet odor of infection even from across the bay. Most telling of all, the creature's eyes were open, watching her with an intelligence that was unmistakably sapient. This wasn't just some animal. This was a person, trapped in a body that was shutting down. Sarah had seen enough trauma cases to recognize the signs. Internal bleeding, systemic infection, severe dehydration, and probably a dozen other complications she couldn't diagnose without proper equipment. In a fully equipped hospital, with a team of specialists and unlimited resources, this patient would still be a long shot. With nothing but her basic medical kit and a failing space station, it was impossible. She approached slowly, hands visible and empty except for her scanner. The dragon's eyes tracked her movement, and she thought she saw something like hope flicker in their golden depths. When she was close enough to touch the massive snout, she stopped and spoke softly. "Hey there, I'm Sarah. I'm a doctor and I'm going to try to help you, okay?" The dragon's response was barely a whisper of air across vocal cords the size of ship cables, but Sarah caught the meaning. A single word in accented standard: "Please." That one word broke Sarah's heart and set her resolve in stone. She'd taken an oath to do no harm, to preserve life wherever possible. She'd never which species that oath covered. Sarah opened her medical kit and began her assessment. The dragon was massive, easily 200 meters from snout to tail, but the principles of trauma medicine were universal. Airway, breathing, circulation. The fundamentals that had saved human lives for centuries might just work here too. The dragon's breathing was shallow and rapid, suggesting pain and possible internal injuries. Sarah's scanner showed elevated heart rate and signs of infection, but the readings were inconsistent. The device hadn't been designed for non-human physiology, and she was working blind half the time. She started with the obvious wounds first. The burns along the dragon's flank were infected and weeping, probably the result of weapons fire. Sarah cleaned them as best she could with antiseptic wipes, knowing it was barely a stopgap measure. The dragon flinched at her touch but didn't pull away, seeming to understand she was trying to help. The deeper problem was internal. Sarah's scanner suggested massive trauma to what might be internal organs, but without knowing dragon anatomy, she was guessing. What she needed was proper equipment, a surgical suite, and about 6 months of xenobiology training. What she had was determination and the contents of a kit designed for human emergencies. As she worked, the dragon began to speak, its voice growing stronger as Sarah's ministrations seemed to ease some of its pain. Its name was, and it had been the station's chief engineer before the attack. Pirates had hit the mining operation without warning, overwhelming the small security force and killing most of the human crew. Had tried to fight them off, but dragon fire was useless against modern battle armor, and it had taken a direct hit from a plasma cannon. The pirates had left for dead, not knowing that dragons were incredibly resilient. It had crawled to the cargo bay and activated the emergency beacon, hopping against hope that someone would answer. Most species would have taken one look at a dying dragon and decided the risk wasn't worth it. Humans, apparently, were different. Sarah listened as she worked, using her scanner to map what she hoped were major blood vessels and applying pressure bandages where she detected internal bleeding. She injected the dragon with human antibiotics, hoping they would have some effect on alien infections. It was all improvisation and guesswork, but it was better than doing nothing. The real breakthrough came when Sarah remembered something from her medical school training about trauma patients and psychological response. She began talking to, not just about the medical procedure, but about anything and everything. Earth, her childhood, her training, her dreams of exploring the galaxy. The dragon's vital signs improved as they talked, and Sarah realized that hope might be just as powerful as any drug in her kit. Hours passed as Sarah worked, and gradually the dragon's condition stabilized. The bleeding slowed, the infection seemed to respond to the antibiotics, and its breathing became deeper and more regular. It was far from a cure, but it was progress. As the station's artificial night cycle dimmed the emergency lighting, Sarah found herself curled up against the dragon's warm flank, her medical scanner beeping softly as it monitored both their vital signs. Its massive head rested near her, and they continued their conversation in quiet whispers. "Why did you stop?" asked, the dragon's voice a rumble that Sarah felt as much as heard. "Your ship could have passed by like all the others." Sarah considered the question, looking up at the dragon's golden eyes. "Because someone needed help and I could provide it. That's what doctors do." "But I am not of your species. You owe me nothing." "That's not how it works," Sarah replied, surprised by her own certainty. "Pain is pain, regardless of who's feeling it. Life is precious, whether it's human or dragon or anything else. My job isn't to judge who deserves help. My job is to help." It was quiet for a long moment, and Sarah thought the dragon might have fallen asleep. Then, in a voice filled with something that sounded like wonder, "Your species is strange, Sarah. In all my years traveling the stars, I have never encountered such compassion." "Maybe you just haven't met the right humans," Sarah suggested with a tired smile. "Perhaps," agreed, "but I am beginning to think that all humans might be the right humans." As Sarah drifted off to sleep, lulled by the steady rhythm of the dragon's breathing and the warmth of its scales, she had no idea that their conversation was being recorded by the station's automated systems. She didn't know that the beacon was still broadcasting, carrying not just a distress signal, but audio and video of everything happening in the cargo bay. She certainly had no way of knowing that her simple act of compassion was being watched by half the galaxy, or that by morning, everything would change. Sarah woke to the sound of ships landing. Many ships, from the sound of it, their engines creating a symphony of different technologies and power sources that echoed through the station's hull. She sat up carefully, trying not to disturb, who was sleeping peacefully for the first time since she'd found him. The dragon's vital signs on her scanner looked better than they had any right to be. She whispered, gently touching the dragon's snout, "We have company." The dragon's eyes opened immediately, alert and focused. "I hear them," rumbled softly. "Many different engine types. This is not a rescue fleet from one world." Sarah's stomach clenched with worry. If word had gotten out about the distress beacon, they might be about to have visitors from every corner of the galaxy, and not all of them would be friendly. The sound of footsteps echoed through the station corridors, growing louder as they approached the cargo bay. Sarah stood and moved to position herself between and the entrance, her hand instinctively reaching for the small sidearm she'd brought from her ship. It wouldn't do much against serious threats, but it made her feel slightly less helpless. The first figure to enter the cargo bay was unlike anything Sarah had ever seen. It stood on 4 legs like a centaur, but its lower body was covered in crystalline formations that caught and refracted the light. Its upper torso was humanoid but translucent, and Sarah could see what might have been organs pulsing with soft blue light beneath its skin. When it spoke, its voice sounded like music played on crystal chimes. "Dr. Sarah," the being said, and somehow Sarah understood it perfectly despite never hearing the language before. "I am Resonance of Distant Stars, High Healer of the Crystalline Collective. We have traveled far to witness what you have accomplished here." Before Sarah could respond, more figures entered the cargo bay. A creature with 6 arms and compound eyes that reflected rainbows. A being that looked like it was made of living mercury, constantly shifting and reforming. Something that might have been a walking tree if trees grew in geometric patterns and hummed with their own internal energy. "How do you know my name?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "And what do you mean what I've accomplished?" Resonance of Distant Stars gestured with one delicate, crystalline arm toward a small device floating near the ceiling. "The station's emergency beacon has been broadcasting continuously for the past day. Not just a distress signal, but everything that has transpired in this chamber. Your healing of the dragon has been observed by representatives of 47 different civilizations." Sarah's blood ran cold. "Everything." "Your methods," said the being, stepping forward with a clicking of chitinous feet. "Your techniques, your tools. I'm Hive Queen H of the Swarm Collective, and we have never seen such primitive yet effective healing practices." "Primitive?" Sarah bristled at the word, but's gentle rumble stopped her from saying something she might regret. "Peace, Sarah," the dragon said, lifting his massive head to look at their visitors. "I believe they mean no insult. Tell me, honored healers, what did you observe that brought you here?" The mercury being flowed forward, taking on a more humanoid shape as it moved. When it spoke, its voice was like liquid silver poured over stones. "We observed," it said, "impossibility. Your species doctor appears to practice medicine without quantum resonance chambers, without cellular reconstruction matrices, without even basic neural interface protocols. Yet you achieved healing." "More than healing," added the tree-like being, its voice a whisper of wind through leaves. "We monitored the dragon's biosignatures throughout the process. By all known medical science, it should have died within the first hour of your arrival. Instead, not only did it survive, its condition actually improved." Sarah looked around at the gathering of alien healers, feeling like she was missing something important. "I don't understand. I just used basic trauma medicine. Clean wounds, stop bleeding, fight infection. It's standard procedure." "Standard for whom?" asked Resonance of Distant Stars. "Doctor, most species in the galaxy have moved far beyond such direct methods. We use technology to reshape matter at the quantum level, to edit genetic code in real time, to interface directly with the patient's neural pathways. We have not laid hands upon the sick for." "But that's the foundation of medicine," Sarah protested. "How can you heal someone without examining them, without understanding their condition through observation and touch?" The assembled beings exchanged what Sarah interpreted as meaningful looks, though reading alien body language was challenging. Finally, Hive Queen H spoke up. "Doctor, may we ask you to demonstrate your techniques? Several of our number have brought patients that our advanced methods have been unable to help. We would consider it a great honor if you would examine them." Sarah's mind reeled. Here she was, being asked to practice medicine on alien species she'd never seen before, using nothing but human training and basic tools. It seemed insane. But then she looked at who was watching her with those intelligent golden eyes, and remembered why she'd become a doctor in the first place. "I can try," she said finally. "But I need to be clear about something. I'm not magic. I'm not performing miracles. I'm just applying basic medical principles and hoping they translate across species barriers. I can't guarantee anything." "We understand," said Resonance of Distant Stars. "But what you have already accomplished suggests that your methods may be more universal than our advanced techniques." The first patient was brought in by the tree-like being, whose name translated roughly to ancient growth under starlight. The patient was another plant creature, but this one was clearly sick. Its crystalline bark was dull and cracking, its geometric leaves were brown at the edges, and it moved with obvious pain. Sarah approached slowly, just as she had with, "Hello," she said gently. "I'm Sarah, can you tell me what's wrong?" The sick being's voice was barely a whisper. "Poison," it managed. "Star metal poison. Advanced treatments cannot reach the contamination." Sarah nodded and opened her medical kit. The scanner was even less useful with plant physiology than it had been with dragon anatomy, but she had other tools. She looked carefully at the patient's bark, noting patterns in the discoloration. She gently touched the affected areas, feeling for temperature differences, swelling, or other signs of systemic infection. What she found reminded her of heavy metal poisoning cases she'd seen during her residency in industrial zones on Earth. The contamination seemed to be concentrated in the creature's equivalent of a circulatory system, and the advanced alien treatments had apparently focused on neutralizing the poison at a molecular level without considering the secondary damage it was causing. "I think," Sarah said slowly, "that your doctors have been treating the symptom instead of the cause. The poison is the obvious problem, but the real damage is from your body's immune response. You need to reduce the inflammation first, then worry about the contamination." She pulled out a basic anti-inflammatory medication from her kit, designed for humans but with properties that might translate. "This is going to be a guess," she warned. "But if my theory is right, this should help your body stop attacking itself long enough for your natural healing processes to handle the poison." The assembled alien doctors watched in fascination as Sarah administered the medication and began a series of basic diagnostic tests. She checked the patient's reflexes, monitored its vital signs with her scanner, and most importantly, kept talking to it, asking about symptoms and changes in how it felt. Over the course of an hour, the plant being's condition visibly improved. The dullness in its bark began to fade, and its movements became less pained. By the time Sarah declared the treatment complete, the patient was standing and its voice was stronger. "Remarkable," breathed ancient growth under starlight. "You have accomplished more in 1 hour than our finest healers managed in months of treatment." But Sarah wasn't finished. The second patient was brought forward by Hive Queen H, and it presented an entirely different challenge. This was a member of the species, but its compound eyes were clouded, and it moved with the hesitant steps of someone who couldn't see properly. The queen explained that her drone had been injured in an accident, and despite the most advanced ocular reconstruction techniques, its vision had not returned. The specialists believed the damage was permanent. Sarah examined the patient carefully, using a small penlight from her kit to check pupil response. What she found was subtle but significant. The drone's eyes were perfectly reconstructed on a physical level, but there were signs of neural pathway disruption that the alien doctors had missed. "I think the problem isn't with the eyes themselves," Sarah explained as she worked. "It's with the neural connections. The trauma caused swelling that interfered with the signals between the eyes and the brain. Your doctors fixed the physical damage, but they didn't account for the fact that the brain needed time to relearn how to process visual information." She began a series of simple vision exercises, starting with basic light detection and gradually building up complexity. It was the same kind of rehabilitation therapy used for human patients with traumatic brain injuries, adapted for physiology. To everyone's amazement, including Sarah's, the drone's vision began to return almost immediately. Within 2 hours, it was navigating the cargo bay with confidence, its compound eyes bright and clear. The pattern continued through the day. Patient after patient was brought before Sarah, each representing a failure of advanced alien medicine. And one by one, using nothing but basic human medical knowledge and a profound willingness to listen to what the patients themselves were telling her, Sarah achieved what the galaxy's most sophisticated technology could not. A crystalline being suffering from quantum resonance displacement was cured with bed rest and proper hydration. A gaseous entity with memory formation problems responded to simple cognitive exercises that Sarah adapted from human dementia therapy. A machine-like entity with processing errors was fixed when Sarah realized it needed what amounted to a software reboot rather than hardware replacement. As word spread through the growing crowd of observers, more and more beings arrived. The cargo bay became a medical conference, with representatives from dozens of species sharing notes and observations. They called it the human method or primitive healing, but Sarah could see the wonder in their eyes. What amazed them wasn't just that her treatments worked, but how she approached each patient. She listened. She observed. She treated each being as an individual with their own experience of illness rather than a collection of symptoms to be corrected. In a galaxy where medicine had become increasingly technological and impersonal, the simple act of a doctor caring about her patients as people was revolutionary. By the end of the day, Sarah was exhausted but exhilarated. She had treated 17 different alien species, with a success rate that explanation. But more than that, she had seen something beautiful in the diversity of life in the galaxy and in the universal desire to heal and be healed. As the alien doctors began to depart, promising to spread word of what they had witnessed, resonance of distant stars approached Sarah one last time. "Doctor," the crystalline being said, its voice ringing with harmonics that suggested deep respect. "You have shown us something we had forgotten in our pursuit of technological advancement. You have reminded us that medicine is not just about correcting biological errors, but about compassion for the suffering of others." "That's all I know how to do," Sarah replied honestly. "Everything else is just details." "Indeed," said the alien doctor, "and perhaps that is why you succeed where we fail." As the last of the visitors departed, Sarah found herself alone with again. The dragon was sitting up now, looking stronger than he had since she'd found him. His golden eyes held an expression that might have been pride. "You realize what you have done, don't you?" asked softly. Sarah shook her head. "I practiced medicine, same as I've been doing for 15 years. "No," the dragon said, his voice gentle but firm. "You have changed how the galaxy thinks about healing. Word of this will spread to every corner of known space. They will call you the divine healer, the human who could cure what no one else could touch." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "I'm not divine, I'm just a doctor who got lucky." "Perhaps," agreed, "but sometimes luck and divine intervention look very much the same from the outside." Neither of them could have predicted just how prophetic those words would prove to be. 3 months later, Sarah stood on the observation deck of the medical station orbiting Nexus Prime, watching ships arrive from across the galaxy. What had started as a small mining station emergency had somehow evolved into the largest medical conference in galactic history. Representatives from over 300 species had gathered to observe and learn what they were calling the human healing method. The transformation had been overwhelming. The abandoned mining station had been converted into a state-of-the-art medical facility, funded by donations from grateful patients and their governments. Sarah now had access to the most advanced diagnostic equipment from dozens of different civilizations, but she still carried her original medical kit wherever she went. Sometimes the simplest tools were still the most effective. "Doctor," the voice belonged to her new assistant, a young named Flux whose species communicated through patterns of bioluminescence as well as speech. "The delegation from the hegemony has arrived. They're requesting an immediate consultation." Sarah suppressed a sigh. The hegemony was one of the galaxy's most powerful political entities, and their medical requests tended to be less about healing and more about demonstrating their importance. But she'd learned that even the most arrogant patients usually had genuine suffering beneath their posturing. "Of course, set them up in examination room 7 and ask Doctor to join us." Flux's patterns shifted to what Sarah had learned indicated surprise. "You're sure you want the dragon present? The hegemony delegation specifically requested a private consultation." "All the more reason to have there," Sarah replied with a slight smile. "Besides, he's becoming quite the medical practitioner himself." It was true, had made a full recovery and had become Sarah's most trusted colleague. His combination of dragon resilience, engineering expertise, and newfound medical knowledge made him uniquely qualified to help with the most challenging cases. More importantly, his presence served as a living reminder of what had started this whole phenomenon. The examination room was designed to accommodate patients of vastly different sizes and physiologies, with adjustable atmospheric controls and gravity fields. The hegemony delegation consisted of 3 beings, 2 of whom Sarah recognized as the species' typical diplomatic caste. The third, however, was clearly the patient, and Sarah's trained eye immediately spotted the signs of serious illness. The hegemony chancellor, a tall being with blue-tinted skin and elaborate ceremonial markings, stepped forward with the kind of dignity that suggested he was doing Sarah a tremendous favor by being here. "Doctor, we have come to seek your—" unique methods for a most delicate matter. Sarah nodded politely but focused her attention on the patient, a younger member of the same species whose ceremonial markings were significantly simpler. "Hello," she said directly to the patient, ignoring protocol. "I'm Sarah. Can you tell me what's wrong?" The young being glanced nervously at the chancellor before speaking in a voice barely above a whisper. I am dying, doctor. Our finest medical minds have examined me for months. They say it is a genetic defect that cannot be corrected." entered the room at that moment, his massive form filling the doorway. The Chancellor took a step back, clearly uncomfortable with the dragon's presence, but Sarah gestured for to join them. "This is Doctor," Sarah said formally. "He'll be assisting with the examination." The dragon's golden eyes studied the patient with the same intensity Sarah had learned to appreciate. "Your pardon, young one, but you are not dying from any genetic defect." The Chancellor's diplomatic composure cracked slightly. "With respect, Dragon, our medical scanners are the most advanced in the galaxy. The genetic markers are unmistakable." "I'm sure they are," Sarah agreed, opening her medical kit. "But let's start with the basics. How long have you been feeling sick?" What followed was a careful examination that revealed a familiar pattern. The patient's symptoms had begun shortly after a coming-of-age ceremony that involved ritual scarification. The advanced medical scanners had detected unusual genetic activity in the affected tissue and concluded it was a hereditary disorder awakening at maturity. But Sarah's hands-on examination, combined with engineering perspective, revealed something very different. The scarification had been done with contaminated tools, introducing a slow-acting pathogen that was altering the patient's genetic expression in the affected areas. The hegemony's medical technology was so focused on genetic analysis that they had missed the simple fact that this was an infection. "The treatment is straightforward," Sarah explained as she prepared a course of broad-spectrum antibiotics. "Clean out the infection, support the body's natural healing processes, and give the genetic expression time to return to normal." That's impossible," the Chancellor stammered. "Our geneticists spent months analyzing the problem. They determined that surgical removal of the affected tissue was the only option, and even that carried significant risks." Rumbled softly, the sound his species made when they were amused. "Your geneticists were examining the wrong problem. They saw altered genetics and assumed it was the cause rather than the symptom." 6 hours later, the patient's condition was noticeably improved. The infection markers in Sarah's scanner were dropping, and the young being's energy levels were returning to normal. What the galaxy's most advanced medical technology had declared impossible, a simple course of medication and basic supportive care had accomplished. The Chancellor's attitude had shifted from barely concealed condescension to something approaching reverence. As they prepared to leave, he approached Sarah with obvious reluctance to acknowledge what had happened. "Doctor, the hegemony owes you a debt that we may never be able to repay. Our child was facing death, and you have given them life." "I just treated an infection," Sarah replied. "Any competent doctor could have done the same thing if they'd looked in the right place." "But they did not look," the Chancellor said quietly. "They saw complexity where there was simplicity, and they saw impossibility where there was merely difficulty. This is the gift of your species, is it not, to see what others cannot?" After the delegation left, Sarah found herself in the station's main laboratory reviewing the cases they had treated over the past 3 months. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Time after time, the galaxy's most advanced medical science had failed where basic human medicine succeeded. "It's not that humans are naturally better healers," Sarah mused as she updated her patient files. "It's that we approach medicine differently. Most galactic civilizations have become so focused on technological solutions that they've forgotten the importance of observation, intuition, and treating the patient as a whole being." Nodded, his massive head moving carefully to avoid knocking over the delicate instruments surrounding them. "Your species has an unusual relationship with technology. Most civilizations either reject it entirely or become completely dependent upon it. Humans seem to use technology as a tool while maintaining their connection to more fundamental approaches." "Maybe that's because we're still relatively new to advanced technology," Sarah suggested. "We've only been spacefaring for a few centuries. Most of our medical training is still based on techniques developed when all we had were our hands and our brains." "Perhaps," agreed, "but I think it may be something deeper than that." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a new patient, one that would challenge everything they thought they understood about the limits of medical science. The being was brought in by a delegation from the ethereal collective, a species that existed primarily as energy beings with only minimal physical form. The patient itself was barely visible, little more than a faint shimmer in the air that occasionally coalesced into something resembling a humanoid outline. The delegation's spokesperson, slightly more solid than the patient, but still translucent, explained the problem in harmonics that Sarah's universal translator had difficulty parsing. Our companion has been fatting for cycle counts beyond measure. We believe the condition is untreatable, as it affects the very essence of our being rather than any physical structure. Sarah stared at the barely visible patient, feeling completely out of her depth. How do you examine someone who barely exists in physical reality? How do you treat a being made of living energy? The answer came from an unexpected source. As Sarah struggled to figure out how to even begin an examination, she noticed that her medical scanner was picking up faint readings whenever it was pointed at the patient. The readings were unlike anything she'd seen before, but they followed patterns that seemed familiar. She said slowly, "Doesn't this remind you of something we've seen before?" The dragon studied the scanner readings, his engineering background making connections that Sarah's medical training had missed. "Energy fluctuations," he said finally. "Irregular patterns, inefficient resonance frequencies. Sarah, I think your patient is suffering from something analogous to cardiac arrhythmia." It was a breakthrough moment. If the patient's energy form could be compared to a biological system, then perhaps the medical principles that worked for physical beings might apply here too. Sarah couldn't check a pulse or listen to breathing, but she could monitor energy patterns and look for irregularities. What she found was a gradually deteriorating resonance pattern, like a heart slowly forgetting how to beat properly. The entity's life force was literally falling out of sync with itself, and each irregularity made the next one more likely. The treatment was unlike anything Sarah had ever attempted. Working with engineering knowledge and the scanner's energy readings, they developed a technique that was part medical procedure and part electronics repair. Using carefully calibrated electromagnetic pulses from the scanner, they helped guide the patient's energy pattern back into stable resonance. It took hours of delicate work, with Sarah making tiny adjustments based on the scanner readings while monitored the overall energy patterns. Gradually, the patient became more solid, more visible, more present. By the end of the procedure, the being was solid enough to speak in recognizable harmonics. "Impossible," the collective's spokesperson whispered, its form flickering with what might have been amazement. "We believed our companion was beyond help. Our greatest scholars declared the condition untreatable. All we did was help them remember how to exist properly," Sarah explained, though she was still not entirely sure how they had accomplished it. "Sometimes healing isn't about adding something new, but about helping the body remember how it's supposed to work." Word of the energy beings treatment spread even faster than previous cases had. Within days, delegations were arriving from species that existed in forms of reality that most beings couldn't even comprehend. Plasma-based entities, quantum consciousness collectives, and beings that existed across multiple dimensions all sought treatment from the human who could heal the unhealable. Each case pushed Sarah and to expand their understanding of what medicine could be. They learned to treat patients who existed as living mathematical equations, beings whose illnesses were conceptual rather than physical, and entities whose very existence challenged the boundaries between life and technology. Through it all, Sarah maintained her core principles. Listen to the patient. Observe carefully. Look for simple explanations before assuming complexity. Treat the whole being, not just the symptoms. Use technology as a tool, but don't let it replace human intuition and compassion. The galaxy began to change. Medical schools across hundreds of worlds started incorporating human techniques into their curricula. The concept of bedside manner became a standard part of alien medical training. Touch, observation, and direct communication with patients were rediscovered by civilizations that had forgotten their importance. But perhaps the most significant change was in how different species viewed each other. Sarah's success rate had nothing to do with human technological superiority or genetic advantages. It came from a willingness to see past surface differences and recognize the common experience of suffering and healing that connected all living beings. Standing on the observation deck 6 months after everything began, watching the latest group of ships arrive with their cargo of hope and desperation, Sarah reflected on how far they'd come. She was no longer just a trauma surgeon working the merchant routes. The galaxy had given her a title she'd never asked for but had learned to accept: the Divine Healer. "Do you ever regret it?" asked, joining her at the observation window. "Your quiet life aboard the Prosperity was certainly less complicated." Sarah considered the question seriously. The responsibility was overwhelming at times, and the constant stream of impossible cases was exhausting. But every day brought new patients, new species, new challenges that expanded her understanding of life in the universe. Every success meant that someone who had been given up for lost would get to return to their loved ones. "No regrets," she said finally. "This is what I trained for, what I dreamed of when I first decided to become a doctor. I just never imagined it would look like this." "The galaxy is fortunate that you stopped to answer a simple distress beacon," observed. Sarah smiled, remembering that first night when she'd curled up against a dying dragon's flank with nothing but hope and stubbornness to guide her. "I think the galaxy and I are fortunate that someone taught us both something about compassion." Through the observation window, another ship was approaching, its hull configuration unlike anything in her database. Soon there would be another patient, another species, another opportunity to discover that the principles of healing were truly universal. Sarah picked up her medical kit, the same simple kit that had started everything, and headed toward the docking bay. Somewhere in the universe, someone needed help, and she had work to do.